So why are so many of my liberty friends saying, Austin, don't vote to legalize marijuana here in the state of Missouri? My friend who I trusted to fight for freedom just showed me a picture of her ballot. She voted no to legalize pot here in the state of Mo. Ho, 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 ho. Let's talk to Camellia Peterson, who's joining us now on the phone. Good morning, CJ. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty well. Thank you.
Glad to have you here. So you voted no to legalize pot. You're statist, authoritarian tyrant.
I did, although I like to think I did so in defense of liberty.
Oh, really? Well, let's hear about it then. Why?
Well, I know we have kind of talked ad nauseum about all of the reasons why this amendment for legalization is bad. It is, monopolistic. It really discriminates against minorities in a lot of ways. It creates a new felony, and it puts it all in the Constitution. There's a lot of other things that it does. It's 39 pages long, for Pete's sake, and it says it does expungement, although I'm not sure that it's really very good expungement. But it also does things like creates an equity officer to kind of make sure that these micro businesses get handed to the right people. But it also gives that equity officer some pretty broad, vague powers. And so it's cleverly written, I think, in order to allow for there to be a lot of manipulation in the future. And I think, that short-term gain of liberty and being able to legalize marijuana right now in the long term will be far more detrimental to liberty, because I talk to people who say, well, this is as good as we're going to get, and the legislature is not going to do anything about it. So we need to do this, and we can always go back and fix this, by, in the Constitution again. And I'm like, no, you can't. It's just not that easy. It's hard enough to do it right now. And, one of the things that people are working on in Missouri is making that initiative petition process even more difficult, which has some good sides to it. But at the same time, it will make it much more difficult to fix these kind of things when we all of a sudden figure out that, oh, look, it's really not so good after all.
If you're just tuning in, we're speaking to Camellia Peterson. She's the editor of the LibertarianRepublic.com, and we're talking to her about why she voted no to legalize marijuana here in the state of Missouri. CJ, would you say that the campaigners to legalize it have got more momentum behind them, or the people who are fighting against the amendment? Because of the circles that I run in, all I hear from are the vote no on three people. But have you been able to see or hear? I know that you're a big door knocker, so. Would you say that the mojo is behind the people who are going to vote to legalize it? Do you think this passes?
I'm a little unsure how to predict whether or not it will pass. I really am hoping that it's not, but the reality is that the pro Amendment 3 people, Legal Mo, whatever it's called, they've got a ton of money behind this. I mean, millions. I just saw a report come out from the filings from last night for the MEC reports, and I think that 1.3 million is what they have raised and put into this so far. And so the anti-Amendment 3 people are very much outspent. But I will say our friend Ethan Thampy has been crisscrossing the state like nobody else, talking to groups about this. And this, I think the challenge is that there are a ton of grassroots groups and Republican groups who have taken this up and have really made it one of their top issues, and for all of the right reasons. Now, a lot of them, they're also taking it up because they're just kind of anti-legalization to begin with. But I think the good part of it is they're also seeing what the downsides are into putting into the Constitution. And I think that Republicans in general are a lot more amenable to legalization. And I think that there was enough momentum with it in the legislature last session that we have a fair shot at. I think a lot of the legislators have opened their eyes to, even though they don't personally agree with it, they know it's coming. And if they want to be able to make sure that it's done right and, with at least some semblance of free market capitalism, that they need to do something because, they need to be able to change it to make the corrections that may be needed.
That's a really good point. Do you buy into the conspiracy theories that the people who are putting this on the ballot are just just doing so that they can enrich themselves?
I'm not so sure that's just a conspiracy. I mean, with the way that the medical marijuana, was passed, I mean, it's already pretty monopolistic. It was at the time, 2 years ago, it was the least bad option of what, four of them on the ballot. And so this really just kind of, I mean, they have a lot of incentive to do this because they've created a good business with the medical marijuana side of things. And the companies that are invested in that medical marijuana are the ones who are going to be benefiting from this.
Camellia, let's go to the main thrust of the topic that we've been discussing today. This question about a pandemic amnesty and the question of revenge versus justice. Can you kind of see what I'm saying here and the point that I'm making and talking about? I won't say necessarily, that we need to have some kind of an amnesty, but I mean, I think that it's a positive thing that some on the left are admitting that they were wrong about things like school closures and wearing masks outdoors. Don't you?
Yes. I think that we need to be open to reconciliation, and I totally understand the point that they haven't apologized. They haven't acknowledged the error of their ways in a lot of cases. Some of them have. I know it just when Jake Tapper came out a week or two ago and said, I'm kind of surprised we're not having a national conversation about the impact that all of these shutdown of schools was having. And it just made me want to scream because I'm like, some of us have been having that conversation for a long time now.
Right.
But, we need to reinforce and acknowledge when somebody comes forward and finally sees the light rather than beating them up for it.
Yeah, I agree, and it's interesting to me, Camellia, that there are so many on the right who are so quick to say that we need to call for peace talks in Ukraine and Russia, but they don't offer that kind of amnesty to people here domestically. Have you noticed that?
Yes, and to your point about, that both sides have made a lot of mistakes and have done things wrong. I mean, in the beginning, obviously the left made a ton of mistakes, and they were talking about, and the science in the beginning, even from the CDC, said, you know what, the schools need better ventilation, and that would be the single best thing they could do for schools, and that would make them a whole lot safer. And they gave schools tons of money. And how many schools do you think updated and upgraded their ventilation systems? Hardly any. So there were stupid things like that. But then on the other end of things, I'm talking to people on the right who are now convinced that the COVID vaccine does all of these crazy things. And we're talking about, shedding. And I had a lady, tell me once that if her eyes were looking different directions, it's because she stood next to somebody who had COVID. And I just like, it's craziness on both sides. And
Right. Now, it's
what's in the middle.
right, and it's not to say that the things that the left did weren't far worse, right?
Sure.
Because no matter
Absolutely.
no matter whether you're a vaxxer or an anti-vaxxer or however you feel about vaccines or politically neutral, the crime to me was wanting to make it mandatory, like firing people from their jobs, right? And New York recently had to rehire people that with back pay that they wrongfully terminated. I mean, think about all the people that were kicked out of the military for this, right?
Yep.
When it's an experimental vaccine, it should absolutely be voluntary, and that's why the libertarian position I think is ultimately the correct one because it allows for freedom of choice in so many of these situations. But the problem is that, and this is just gonna I shouldn't be saying this. I should only tell people what they want to hear. I should learn my lessons, Camellia. But the problem is that right wingers didn't accept the private property. They believe in private property for their own religious liberty. When they want to deny, homosexuals a wedding cake, then it's private property. But when a business owner wants to fire someone because they want their employees to be vaccinated, then all of a sudden the conservatives don't believe in private property, and therein lies their own hypocrisy.
Right. And I think that this is kind of the distinction with when we talk about justice in terms of what's happened with all of the shutdowns and things like that. In New York, they had those employees got back pay, right? So I think that is justice, because anytime the government is taking a hand in it and doing harm, that's why I wasn't really opposed to them handing out money to some of the businesses, because they forced those businesses to close down and lose business. So I think that, there was some justice in that, and that there was an obligation on the government's part. But I think it's totally different when you're talking about private businesses. Now, it's going to get messy, because there is no way that we're ever going to realistically get perfect justice from any of this. Somebody's going to be unhappy, and there's no way around that. And, I have friends who tell me all the time, not just about the COVID stuff, but about all of these other crazy things that are going on right now, that there is no compromise. There is no talking or reasoning with the left, that we have to crush them and destroy them. And that is the only way that we're going to get, a free culture back. But the thing is, how do you do that? I mean, what does that mean? Because this is like nearly half the country, and you can't just crush and destroy them. If you're going to do anything, you've got to also be changing hearts and minds.
For sure. And I think if anything, the real enemy is China. The people who did this to us, we do have an actual enemy in this, and we still haven't gotten to the bottom of whether or not this was
Right.
unleashed on us by accident or by deliberate act, which is in itself an actual act of war. Camellia, this is such a good conversation. I'm glad we're having it this morning, and this topic really was a godsend in terms of, content this morning, because I'm getting a lot of texts about it. I'm going to let you go. I'll read some of these texts, and I just want to say thank you so much for your time, Camellia. Awesome as always.